Imagine a bank vault, right? And this vault is just being robbed relentlessly, night after night.
Yeah, just constantly under attack.
Exactly. And it's being hit so hard that the vault itself begins to physically mutate. Like it essentially rewrites its own locking mechanism, changes its fundamental structure just to keep the thieves out.
Right, which sounds completely impossible.
I mean, you would think that's the plot of some crazy science fiction movie. But today, we are actually looking at a living, breathing animal that did exactly that.
It's wild.
It is. Human extraction pushed this creature so incredibly hard, it literally edited its own DNA in a single generation just to survive us.
Which is, frankly, one of the most stunning biological responses ever recorded. I mean, it completely upends the way we usually think about our relationship with the natural world.
Yeah, because we usually just view animals as, I don't know, static background characters in our own human story.
Exactly. But this species proves they're actively reacting to the pressures we apply to them. They're changing in real time.
So today we are taking a deep dive into the elephant. And look, I know what you might be thinking right now. You picture an elephant and you see this majestic, slow-moving icon of the savannah.
Right, the classic nature documentary image.
Yeah. Or maybe you just see them as this tragedy of endangered wildlife. But the stack of sources we're looking at today reveals something infinitely more complex and, well, frankly, a little bit unsettling.
Oh, very unsettling.
Because we are analyzing a creature that human civilization has built vast global systems around. I mean, we're talking about ancient meat processing systems, labor economies, military shock troops, and billion-dollar modern black markets.
Right. And to map all of this out, we are pulling from a massive multidisciplinary stack of data. It's a lot to get through.
It is a massive stack today.
Yeah. We've got archaeological records detailing Paleolithic kill sites in Europe. We are looking at historical reviews of ancient empire logistics. We've brought in cutting-edge ecological data specifically from Cornell University's Elephant Listening Project.
Which is fascinating stuff, by the way.
Oh, incredibly fascinating. Plus, agricultural research from Oxford University. And we're cross-referencing all of this with modern conservation reports from global monitors, like the WWF and the International Union for Conservation of Nature.
Right, and they're the global authority that tracks the extinction risk of species worldwide.
Exactly.
So when you put all these sources together, this really wild thesis emerges. The history of human interaction with the elephant is basically a mirror held up to our own species.
It really is.
It forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. When you, as a human being, are faced with a creature that is incredibly powerful, astonishingly intelligent, and highly valuable, do you choose to learn partnership, or do you immediately build a machine to extract its value?
And historically, well, the answer hasn't been great. An elephant is simply too large for a simple story. I mean, it's too intelligent to be dismissed as mere prey, and historically it has been too financially valuable to ever be left alone in peace.
Yeah, they just couldn't catch a break.
No, they really couldn't. Every interaction we've had with them tests our logistical capabilities, our economic theories, and, the very limits of our control.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even begin to understand how humans have used elephants throughout history, we have to understand the mechanics of what an elephant actually is within its environment.
Right. Biology first.
Exactly, because if you don't grasp their biology, none of the human history makes sense. So let's establish the baseline here. What are we actually talking about when we say elephant today?
Well, we need to be biologically precise. Today we are looking at 3 surviving species.
Okay.
First, you have the African savanna elephant, which the International Union for Conservation of Nature classifies as endangered.
Right.
Then you have a distinct species called the African forest elephant. Now, this one is smaller, lives in the dense jungles of Central Africa, and is currently classified as critically endangered.
Critically endangered, wow.
Yeah. And finally, there's the Asian elephant, scattered across South and Southeast Asia, which is also endangered. So these 3 are the only surviving heirs of a much older, incredibly diverse family of animals called proboscideans.
Proboscideans. So basically, mammals with trunks and tusks.
Correct. And their biology is staggering.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know they are massive, right? Weighing up to 4 or 5 tons, sometimes even more.
Yeah, just absolute units.
But the life cycle is what really dictates their entire relationship with humans. Consider their reproduction. A female elephant has a gestation period of roughly 22 months.
I really want you to think about that if you're listening right now. 22 months.
It's incredible.
That is almost 2 entire years of carrying a single 200-pound calf before it is even born. I mean, why does it take so incredibly long?
It comes down to brain development.
Oh, really?
Elephants are born with highly complex neurological systems that just need time to wire together in the womb. But that single biological requirement, that extreme gestation period, creates a massive vulnerability for the species as a whole.
Because it's such a huge investment of time.
Exactly. They mature very slowly.
Mm.
They reproduce very slowly. A calf relies on its mother's milk for years and relies on the entire herd for protection and education for a decade.
A decade of childhood, essentially.
Right. So if a population is depleted by hunting or disease, they cannot just bounce back in a few seasons like, say, deer or rabbits.
Right, there's no quick recovery.
No. If you remove an adult female from the population, you are fracturing a multi-decade biological investment.
And it isn't just that they live in these environments. Like, the ecological sources we reviewed use a very specific term for them, which I loved: ecosystem engineer.
Yes, a very accurate term.
They don't just walk through the savanna or the rainforest. They edit the landscape. They literally build it.
Let's look at the mechanics of how they actually do that, starting with the African forest elephant. The data from Cornell's Elephant Listening Project maps how these animals move through the dense, dark understory of the Congo Basin. They consume massive amounts of fruit and vegetation. And many of the seeds they eat are incredibly hard,
Like pit-level hard.
even harder. In fact, they are so hard that they cannot germinate on their own. They literally need to pass through the digestive tract of a forest elephant, a process called scarification, where the stomach acids break down the tough outer shell of the seed.
So, okay, the elephant swallows the seed, walks for 20 or 30 miles over the next few days, and then deposits it,
And it deposits it in a massive pile of nutrient-rich dung.
which is like the perfect starter fertilizer.
Exactly. There are entire species of large seeded trees in the African rainforest that depend almost exclusively on elephants to spread their population.
Wow.
If the forest elephant goes extinct, those tree species lose their primary dispersal mechanism. The canopy of the rainforest will physically change shape over the next century.
So they are essentially the gardeners of the jungle.
That's a great way to put it.
And out on the dry savanna, I know the mechanics change, but the engineering impact is basically the same. The research shows them pushing over dead trees, stripping bark, trampling brush.
Yeah, they like natural bulldozers.
Right, which prevents the savanna from becoming a closed canopy woodland, which then maintains the grasslands that millions of zebras and wildebeests rely on. And then there's the well digging. I found this part so cool.
Oh, that is perhaps their most vital function during a drought.
Because they can smell the water, right?
Yes. An elephant can smell water deep underground. So when the rivers dry up and the surface turns to, baked mud, elephants will use their tusks and trunks to dig deep into the dry riverbeds.
It is excavated.
They excavate these massive holes to reach the water table. And after they drink, they move on, and those deep wells become the absolute lifeline for dozens of other species.
Like lions, baboons, birds.
Exactly. Animals who would otherwise just die of dehydration.
So an elephant isn't just an animal living in an ecosystem. It is the infrastructure of the ecosystem.
Yes, living infrastructure.
And this brings us to how they organize themselves to manage all this, because their social structure is entirely matriarchal.
Right.
The herds are made up of related females, sisters, daughters, aunts, and their calves, and they're all led by the oldest female. Now, I used to think the leader of an animal herd was just the biggest, most aggressive one. The one who wins the fights. But that's not what's happening here at all.
Not at all. Leadership in an elephant herd is not based on physical domination or coercion. It is based on stored consequence.
Stored consequence. I like that.
It is based on memory. The matriarch is the oldest, meaning she has lived through the most environmental cycles.
I was trying to find a good metaphor for her while reading the sources, and she is essentially the ship's navigator, or maybe like the master archivist of the herd.
The archivist is a brilliant way to frame it.
Right. She isn't in charge because she's ruthless. She's in charge because she is a walking GPS system holding a 50-year climate map inside her brain.
Exactly. She remembers where the water was during the severe drought 3 decades ago when the usual rivers dried up. She remembers the ancient migration routes that thread between mountains.
Wow.
She remembers which specific sounds indicate danger and which human communities are aggressive versus peaceful.
So she's constantly passing this down.
The young elephants in the herd survive because they are constantly observing her and learning how to navigate the world.
I want to pause on that because the implications are just devastating when we look at human hunting.
They really are.
If a poacher goes out and shoots the oldest female elephant because she has the largest tusks, they are not just killing one animal. They are literally burning down the community's library.
You are literally destroying the cultural memory of the herd. When a matriarch is killed, you leave behind a family of young, relatively inexperienced elephants.
Right, who don't know what to do.
Suddenly, the dry season hits, and the young females don't know the route to the emergency water source. They don't know how to recognize the subtle signs of a predator trap. The entire architecture of the herd is built on intergenerational teaching.
And if you remove the teacher, the system collapses.
Exactly.
It collapses.
Which honestly makes the dawn of human interaction with them so baffling to me. We have this walking library, this massive, highly intelligent creature that shapes entire ecosystems. How did early humans even begin to confront them?
That's a daunting thought.
Right. Put yourself in the shoes of a Paleolithic human. Yeah. You are standing in a valley armed with what is essentially a sharpened stick and some stone.
Just a stick.
And you are looking at a creature the size of a 2-story building. I mean, my first instinct would be to walk the other way. Fast.
I think most people's would be. But to understand this, we have to look deep into prehistory. The archaeological evidence we reviewed completely shatters the old cartoonish idea that early humans were just, simple scavengers who occasionally got lucky and found a dead mammoth to eat. Yeah, just picking off scraps.
That wasn't it. We need to talk about the Neumark Nord site in Germany.
Okay, yes. This site completely changed my understanding of early humans.
It's a pivotal site.
We are talking about Neanderthals living roughly 125,000 years ago, and they weren't hunting the modern African elephants we see today. They were hunting a species called the straight-tusked elephant, or Paleoloxodon antiquus.
Yes.
And the size difference is terrifying.
The straight-tusked elephant was a colossal animal. We are talking about males weighing up to 13 metric tons.
13 metric tons.
To put that in perspective, that is almost twice the size of the largest modern African savanna elephant.
That's just a dinosaur at that point.
And the data from Neumark Nord shows that Neanderthals were repeatedly, systematically hunting these giants over a continuous period of 2,000 years.
Wait, stop there. I have to push back on this a little. Taking down a 13-ton animal with woody spears and stone tips sounds like absolute suicide. Are we absolutely sure they were actively hunting healthy adults? I mean, wouldn't it make more sense that they were just finding elephants that got stuck in the mud? Or targeting the sick ones?
And that is exactly what archaeologists assumed for decades. It makes sense, right?
Okay.
But the skeletal remains at Neumark Nord tell a different story. The bones belong predominantly to healthy, prime-aged adult males.
Wow, okay.
And adult males typically traveled alone, apart from the matriarchal herds, which actually made them isolated targets. And the sheer volume of kills dozens of individual elephants processed over generations at this specific lake edge proves this was an intentional, intergenerational practice.
So they were actively seeking them out.
They likely used the muddy terrain of the lake to slow the massive animals down, using coordinated group exhaustion tactics.
Okay, so let's say a group of Neanderthals successfully traps and kills a 13-ton straight-tusked elephant in the mud. I used to think, wow, what a jackpot. You throw some spears, the giant falls, and the whole tribe feasts for a month.
Right, the ultimate prehistoric buffet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But reading through the logistics in the source material, a successful hunt wasn't a jackpot. It was the beginning of an absolute nightmare.
It was a logistical emergency. Because the moment that 13-ton animal stops breathing, a biological ticking clock begins.
Right.
You are dealing with ambient temperature, flies, bacteria, and the immediate scent of blood carrying for miles.
The spoilage clock. Plus, every dire wolf, cave hyena, and large predator in the area is suddenly heading toward your exact location.
Precisely. And you cannot drag a 13-ton carcass back to your cave. It is entirely immovable.
So what do you even do?
Well, you have to move your entire society to the carcass. And you have to activate a massive workflow immediately. The hunting party has to send runners to bring the rest of the community. You need dedicated teams setting up a defensive perimeter with fire and spears to keep the scavengers at bay.
And the butchery itself. I mean, you can't just slice into an elephant with a pocket knife. The hide on these animals is inches thick. It is literal armor.
It requires highly specialized stone tools, hand axes, and heavy scrapers just to breach the skin.
Right.
And stone tools dull quickly against that kind of hide, so you have people constantly napping new edges right there on the site. Then you have to harvest the meat, but fresh meat rots in
Is
days.
she sitting in the sun?
So another team is frantically gathering massive amounts of firewood to build smoking racks. They are slicing the meat thin and drying it to preserve the calories for the winter.
The sources also talk about the fat. We always think about the meat, but the rendering of fat was crucial, right?
Absolutely vital. Lean meat alone can actually lead to protein poisoning if you don't have enough fat in your diet. The Neanderthals would carve out the massive fat deposits around the organs and render them down.
Oh,
It was an
wow.
incredibly dense, portable source of energy.
And they even used the bones. Like in environments where wood was scarce, the sources show they would fracture these massive tree trunk-sized bones.
Yes, the bone marrow.
They used the bone marrow for calories, but they also used the dense bone shards to craft other tools.
Yeah.
And sometimes they even burned the fat-rich bone fragments as fuel for their fires. It was an entire survival ledger. Nothing was wasted.
So when you look at the mechanics of Newmark Nord, you realize that hunting an elephant forced early humans into complex social organization.
It's like extreme project management.
Exactly. You could not be a chaotic, disorganized group of individuals and successfully process 13 tons of biological material before it rotted. It required delegation and social order under immense pressure. The elephant essentially trained early humans in the art of large-scale logistics.
That paints such a vivid, almost cinematic picture of our ancestors.
It really does.
But, as we move forward in time, human societies transition from just trying to survive the winter to actually building cities, states, and empires. And as our society shifted, our relationship with the elephant fundamentally changed.
We moved past just eating them.
Right. We stopped looking at them purely as a source of calories, and we started looking at them as a source of labor. But here is the bizarre part. Unlike almost every other animal we use for labor, we never truly mastered them.
That is a crucial distinction in the history of human agriculture. Think about the animals we rely on. Cows, sheep, pigs, horses. We domesticated them.
Yeah.
And domestication is a very specific biological process.
Yeah.
We fence them in, we control their reproduction, we decide which individuals breed based on the traits we want, and over thousands of years, we literally rewrite their genetics to make them compliant.
We shape them to fit our needs.
Exactly. We compress their entire existence into our production schedules.
But you simply cannot do that with an elephant. I mean, you cannot put a 22-month gestation period followed by a 10-year childhood into an economic spreadsheet. The math just doesn't work for farming.
No, it completely fails.
Plus, an adult elephant eats hundreds of pounds of vegetation a day. You can't put them in a pen. They would eat themselves into starvation in a week.
Because the biological reality of the elephant resisted domestication, human empires had to adapt. Instead of farming them, we decided to capture them. We went out into the wilderness, located wild power, and engineered systems to trap it.
Which is wild to think about.
And the methods used, particularly in Asia, were astonishingly complex. The most famous example is the Keta system.
Oh, reading about the Keta was wild. It wasn't hunting with a weapon, it was hunting with architecture.
Yes.
Walk us through how a local community actually captures a wild herd of elephants without everyone getting crushed.
The Keta was a massive, highly coordinated operation. Communities would spend weeks building an enormous, heavily fortified wooden stockade deep in the forest. The stockade would have a wide, V-shaped entrance funneling into a central enclosure surrounded by a deep trench and massive timber walls.
So they build this giant trap, but an elephant isn't going to just happily wander into a wooden fort.
No, you have to drive them. And this involved hundreds, sometimes thousands of people.
Wow.
They would form a massive perimeter around a known wild herd miles away from the stockade. Slowly, over days, using drums, controlled fires, shouting, and the firing of blank muskets in later centuries, they would create a wall of noise and panic.
So a wall of sensory overload.
Exactly. They would gently, then aggressively herd the matriarch and her family forward. The elephants, trying to escape the chaos, would move down the path of least resistance, right into the V-shaped funnel and into the stockade. Then the massive gates would drop.
It's incredible engineering, really. But the capture is only half the battle. Now you have a herd of terrified, 4-ton wild animals trapped in a wooden box. How do you actually calm them down and train them?
Whoa.
Because this is where I found the history to be incredibly dark. They used other elephants to do it.
Yes, the use of kumkis. Kumkis were captive elephants that had already been trained and bonded with human handlers called mahouts. The humans would ride the kumquats into the stockade with the wild
And
elephants.
the wild elephants wouldn't attack them.
Usually not. The wild elephants, stripped of their environment and panicking, would often look to the calm kumquats for social cues.
Oh, man.
And the handlers would use the kumquats to pin the wild elephants against the stockade walls, physically restricting their movement so the humans could slip heavy ropes around their legs.
It is almost Shakespearean in its tragedy.
It really is.
We recognize how deeply social these animals are, how much they rely on each other for comfort and safety, and we weaponize that exact trait against them. We use their own need for connection as the mechanism to bind them.
It's a profound manipulation of their biology.
Once captured, they became laborers, moving massive teak logs in the forestry industry. But inevitably, human empires realized that if you have a 4-ton animal that can push over trees, you can probably use it to crush people too.
And that leads to the transition to the war elephant. This became the ultimate symbol of imperial reach. We see it in Hellenistic armies in the Asian empires, and most famously with Carthaginian forces under Hannibal, marching elephants across the freezing Alps to attack Rome.
Right, the famous Alps crossing.
The war elephant was a living shock weapon. They were draped in armor, fitted with spikes, and carried wooden towers on their backs filled with archers.
It is so tempting to look at a war elephant as the ancient equivalent of a military tank. You have this massive armored vehicle that breaks enemy lines, shatters cavalry charges, and causes absolute psychological terror among infantry who have never seen a beast that size.
This is a very common comparison.
But I kept thinking about the fatal flaw in that analogy. A tank doesn't have a nervous system. A tank doesn't feel fear.
And that is exactly where the illusion of human control broke down on the battlefield. An elephant is highly intelligent. It possesses a deep capacity for fear, pain, and confusion.
Right.
When a war elephant is marched onto a battlefield filled with the screaming of tens of thousands of men, the smell of blood, and the sudden use of fire, which the Romans quickly learned to deploy against them, the elephant doesn't just stall out like a broken engine. It panics.
And a panicking 4-ton animal doesn't care whose side it's on.
Exactly. When terrified, the elephant's only instinct is flight. They would routinely spin around and trample their own infantry lines to escape the chaos. The unpredictability of the war elephant was legendary.
Which led to some pretty brutal countermeasures.
It did. In fact, handlers often rode them with a specialized chisel and hammer, ready to drive a spike into the animal's spinal cord to kill it instantly if it turned on its own army.
That detail is just chilling. We put an animal into a terrifying situation of our own making, and when it reacted naturally, we executed it. What does this era tell us about human nature? We took an animal that, culturally, we revered for its wisdom, and we marched it into our slaughterhouses.
It marks a profound moral and psychological shift. Humans recognize the elephant's wildness, its physical power, and its intelligence. But rather than respecting those traits or leaving the animal be, our impulse was to coerce it.
To break it.
We essentially recruited a mind into our wars. It reveals a deep-seated human desire to conquer nature rather than coexist with it. It suggests that when human beings encounter immense power, our first instinct is not awe, but a desire to weaponize it for our own status.
But the era of the war elephant eventually faded as military technology evolved. Gunpowder made a large, slow-moving target a major liability on the battlefield.
Right, they became obsolete.
However, human empires didn't just leave the elephant alone. The global markets quietly realized that the true wealth of an elephant wasn't in its labor, and it wasn't in its ability to terrify an army. The ultimate financial prize was locked inside just one small part of its anatomy, the tusk.
The ivory engine. This is the pivot point where the history of the elephant shifts from local exploitation, where communities hunted for meat or kings captured them for labor, to global industrialized extraction. Ivory became one of the most desired materials on the planet.
Before we get into the economics of the trade, let's look at the material itself, because what makes ivory so physically valuable? Why were humans so obsessed with it? Our sources describe it as essentially a miracle material before the invention of plastics.
Physically, ivory is dentin, which is the exact same tissue that makes up the bulk of human teeth, but obviously on a massive scale.
Right.
What makes elephant ivory unique is its density and its cross-hatching structure. There are no blood vessels in the outer layers of the tusk. This means it is incredibly smooth, highly durable, and it doesn't splinter easily.
You can carve it into impossibly intricate shapes, and you can polish it until it literally glows. So it became the ultimate material for luxury goods. In European salons, it was sliced into piano keys because the porous nature of the ivory absorbed the sweat from a pianist's fingers, preventing them from slipping.
A very specific high-end use.
Yeah. In American pubs, it was turned into perfect, heavy billiard balls. It became handles for expensive cutlery and intricate religious art in Asia. It was the physical embodiment of wealth.
But the economic reality of ivory created a fatal dynamic for the elephant, which we can call the distance problem.
The distance problem.
Right. Unlike meat, which rots and must be consumed locally, ivory is non-perishable. You can chop a tusk off an elephant in the middle of the African savanna, throw it in the hull of a ship, and sail it to London, New York, or Beijing. It holds its value indefinitely.
So the wealth of the material completely disconnected the consumer from the reality of the extraction.
Precisely. Let's look at how that isolation drives a market. When a local community hunts an animal for meat, the kill is visible to everyone. The processing is local.
Everyone sees the cost.
The community can physically see the limits of their landscape. If they kill too many, they see the herds thin out, and they regulate their behavior. But ivory concentrates immense financial value into a portable object that travels thousands of miles. The wealthy consumer playing a piano in London never sees the rotting carcass in the savannah.
Yeah.
They don't hear the distress calls of the orphan calves.
They only see a beautiful white key that makes a nice sound.
And when you separate the consumer from the consequence of their purchase, markets demand scale without any natural moral restraint. The commercial ivory trade prioritized only the high-value parts of the animal. This led to a devastating immoral waste.
Just hacking off the face.
Yes. You have commercial hunters killing a highly intelligent, socially complex animal that took 2 years to gestate and decades to grow, just to hack its face apart for its teeth, leaving 4 tons of meat to rot in the sun. It is the ultimate failure of an economic system. The ledger is entirely unbalanced.
And the global slaughter accelerated to the point where the international community finally had to step in. The sources highlight 1989 as the critical turning point.
Yes, 1989.
That was the year of the CITES ban. CITES stands for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. It's an international agreement between governments. They basically looked at the collapsing elephant populations, hundreds of thousands wiped out in a few decades, and realized the species was in absolute freefall.
The 1989 CITES ban essentially made the international commercial trade of ivory illegal overnight. It was a monumental shift in conservation history. It was a moment where international law tried to enforce a moral boundary that the free market entirely refused to set for itself.
But as we know from prohibition in our own history, simply making a highly valuable product illegal doesn't magically erase the human demand for it. It just pushes the supply chain underground.
It does.
And that brings us to the modern attrition. The ivory trade didn't end in 1989, it just morphed into a global black market.
The modern statistics are sobering. The WWF estimates that around 20,000 elephants are still killed for their ivory every single year.
20,000 every year.
And we need to be clear about who is doing the killing. This is not just a poor local farmer trying to feed his family. The modern ivory trade is driven largely by transnational organized crime syndicates. It is the same logistics networks that move illegal weapons and narcotics. It is highly funded, heavily armed, and incredibly violent.
It's an all-out war, and the tools being used on both sides have escalated far beyond anything we've talked about so far. We aren't just talking about park rangers walking the bush with rifles. Law enforcement is fighting back with cutting-edge science.
Oh, the science is incredible.
One of the sources details the use of DNA forensics. Let's talk about how this actually works, because it sounds like CSI. Africa. I mean, how do you trace a carved ivory statue seized in a shipping container in Asia back to a specific poached elephant?
It relies on incredible biological mapping, pioneered by researchers like Dr. Samuel Wasser. At the base of an elephant's tusk, deep inside the skull, there is a pulp cavity that contains blood and tissue.
Okay.
Even after the ivory is dried and shipped, traces of the elephant's DNA remain trapped inside the dentin. Scientists in forensic labs can actually drill into seized ivory, extract that DNA, and amplify it using a process called PCR.
Okay, so they have the genetic barcode of the dead elephant, but how do they know where it came from?
Well, over the past few decades, scientists have traveled all across Africa collecting elephant dung.
Wow, quite a job.
Very glamorous work. But because an elephant's DNA varies slightly depending on its geographic region, they were able to create a comprehensive genetic map of the entire continent. So when customs agents seize a massive shipment of ivory in Hong Kong, scientists extract the DNA, bounce it against the dun map, and can pinpoint with astonishing accuracy the exact park or reserve where those elephants were killed.
That is brilliant. It allows law enforcement to see exactly which borders are porous and where the crime syndicates are operating, rather than just guessing.
Exactly.
And it's not just DNA. They're using artificial intelligence now, too. AI programs are being trained to analyze the unique growth rings and markings on tusks and photographs to identify individual shipments and map out the trafficking networks.
The technological response is impressive, but the most astonishing response hasn't come from human technology. It has come from the elephant's own biology.
Right.
This brings us back to the bank vault analogy you opened the show with. Our sources detail a study published in the journal Science regarding Mozambique's Gorongosa National Park.
This study completely broke my brain. Walk us through what happened in Gorongosa.
Mozambique went through a brutal civil war from the late 1970s to the early 1990s. During that conflict, armed factions funded their war efforts by relentlessly hunting the elephants in Gorongosa for ivory to sell on the black market. The poaching pressure was unimaginable. They wiped out roughly 90% of the elephant population in the park.
90%. Because they were explicitly targeting the animals with the largest tusks.
Exactly. And because tusk size is a genetic trait, the poachers were essentially acting as a hyper-aggressive evolutionary filter. If an elephant had large tusks, it was killed before it could reproduce.
Right.
But in any elephant population, a very small percentage of females are born naturally tuskless due to a rare genetic mutation. Historically, those tuskless females were at a disadvantage in the wild. But during the war, lacking tusks became the ultimate survival mechanism. The poachers ignored them.
So the tuskless females survived, they reproduced, and they passed that tuskless gene on to their daughters. And the science studies show that within just a couple of decades, the percentage of tuskless females in the park skyrocketed.
It is rapid, forced evolutionary selection. Typically, an evolutionary shift of that magnitude in a large mammal takes thousands, if not millions of years of natural environmental pressure. But human extraction was so severe, so lethal, and so efficient that it forced a physiological shift in a matter of decades.
The bank vault literally changed its own locks. Human greed literally edited the genetic code of a wild animal.
It proves that humans are no longer just a predator to the elephant. We are a massive evolutionary pressure. We are physically reshaping the architecture of the species. The tuskless female elephants walking around Gorongosa today are a living biological receipt of human violence.
That is haunting. We carved our greed right into their DNA.
We really did.
But as bad as the black market poaching is, it isn't the only existential threat elephants face today. Even if we stopped all poaching tomorrow, the elephant would still be in crisis. Because while they're being hunted for their teeth, the actual land they need to walk on is shrinking beneath their feet.
The habitat loss.
Right. This brings us to the modern collision, the direct conflict between ancient animal migration and modern human agriculture.
In conservation circles, this is known as human-elephant conflict, or HEC. And it is arguably the most complex, intractable challenge we face. As human populations expand, we need to grow more food. So we build farms, roads, and fences across the savannas and forests. But remember what we discussed earlier about the matriarch's memory.
The 50-year map in her head.
Right. She knows the ancient migration routes. She knows that to get from the summer feeding grounds to the winter water source, her family has to walk through a specific valley. But the elephants don't look at a human map and understand a property line. They just walk the ancestral path.
They just go where they've always gone.
And suddenly, right in the middle of their ancient highway, there is a modern human farm filled with incredibly delicious calorie-dense crops like maize or watermelon.
And an elephant eats hundreds of pounds of food a day. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a subsistence farmer in rural Africa or India. You have worked the soil for months. Your entire family's income and survival for the next year depends on this one harvest. And in the middle of the night, a herd of 10 elephants quietly walks out of the brush. In a matter of hours, they can consume and trample an entire year's worth of labor. Total economic devastation before sunrise.
Which is an absolute catastrophe. This is why we have to strip away the sentimental lens we often use in the West. This isn't a cartoonish conflict between noble wildlife and bad humans. It is a tragic, high-stakes collision of survival.
Yeah, it's about staying alive.
A farmer protecting their livelihood might resort to poisoning the elephants or shooting them out of pure desperation. So conservationists are trying to design coexistence strategies. They're trying to map wildlife corridors to give elephants safe passage. They're using GPS tracking collars to send text messages to villages when a herd is approaching so they can be chased away safely.
But my favorite strategy from the research is the beehive fences. The data from Oxford University, specifically Dr. Lucy King's research, is just brilliant. It turns out the largest land mammal on Earth is terrified of African honeybees.
It seems counterintuitive, right? Why would a 4-ton animal with armor-like skin care about a bee?
Right. But it comes down to the anatomy of the trunk. The outside of the elephant is tough, but the inside of the trunk is incredibly sensitive, highly innervated tissue. If a bee flies up an elephant's trunk and stings it on the inside, the pain is agonizing.
Ouch.
Yeah. The elephants know this. They actually have a specific rumble of vocalization that serves as an alarm call just for bees.
So researchers leveraged that biological fear. They started building fences around local farms that aren't made of wire or wood. They suspend actual living beehives every 10 meters or so, connected by a tripwire.
So clever.
If an elephant tries to enter the farm and pushes against the wire, the hives swing, the bees swarm, and the elephants immediately turn around and run.
The data shows it successfully deters elephants up to 86% of the time. It is such an elegant solution. It protects the crops, it keeps the elephants alive, and it actually provides the farmers with a secondary source of income because they can harvest and sell the elephant-friendly honey.
It is a beautiful example of using the ecosystem's own internal dynamics to create a boundary, rather than relying on guns or concrete. But we have to be realistic.
Right.
Fences alone, even clever ones, don't solve the macroeconomic reality of living with megafauna. Which brings us to the most controversial, hotly debated topic in the source material: trophy hunting.
Okay, let's step into this minefield carefully because this is incredibly polarizing. Let's look at the actual arguments and the math presented in the sources. On one side, you have the pro-hunting argument. The fundamental idea here is that wildlife must pay for its own survival.
Right.
Conservation takes a massive amount of money. So, countries issue a very small number of highly regulated permits for wealthy, mostly Western hunters to shoot a specific elephant, usually an older, non-breeding male. These permits can cost upwards of $50,000 to $100,000.
The argument is that this massive injection of cash can be used to fund anti-poaching patrols, maintain the national parks, and, crucially, be distributed to the local communities.
So there's an economic incentive.
The logic is that if a village receives a large financial payout from the legal hunt, they are suddenly incentivized to protect the local elephant population from illegal poachers, because the herd is now seen as an economic asset rather than just an agricultural pest.
But on the other side, you have the fierce counterargument. First, there's the fundamental moral objection. Critics argue that killing an endangered, highly intelligent, socially complex creature with deep emotional bonds purely for sport and status is ethically unjustifiable.
That's a strong moral stance.
Absolutely. But beyond the morals, critics attack the actual economics. They argue that the massive hunting fees rarely trickle down to the impoverished local communities. The funds often get intercepted by corrupt officials or absorbed by the foreign outfitter companies running the safaris.
And the source material highlights a specific, rigorous study conducted in Zimbabwe that investigated this exact economic claim. The researchers wanted to see if the revenue from sustainable trophy hunting was actually balancing the ledger for local farmers.
Did it work out for them?
They added up the financial benefits the communities received from the hunts, and then they subtracted the value of the crops and livestock those communities lost to the elephants over the same period.
And the result was pretty damning. The study showed that the financial benefits from the hunting only offset about 30% of the value of the crops that the local communities lost to the elephants.
So economically, the local people were still operating at a massive 70% loss just by living next to the animals. The math wasn't working.
The math wasn't working at all.
This specific tension raises a much larger question about global justice and conservation. It forces us to confront a dynamic called eco-colonialism.
Yes, eco-colonialism. Let's break that down because it perfectly captures the hypocrisy of the West. It is very easy for someone sitting in a comfortable apartment in London, New York, or Paris to go online, sign a petition, and demand strict conservation. Never touch an elephant. Save them all.
Right, from thousands of miles away.
Yeah, but that person doesn't have to bear the cost. Is it fair to force an impoverished African or Asian community to bear the physical danger and the total economic ruin of living next to a 4-ton bulldozer without providing them with the necessary tools or fair compensation?
Exactly. If international conservation policies criminalize local subsistence farmers for defending their crops while failing to financially compensate them for their loss, and while ignoring the historical reality that many of these communities were dispossessed of their best land to create the national parks in the first place, that becomes a form of eco-colonialism.
It's an unfair burden.
We in the West are essentially outsourcing the immense cost of our moral virtue onto the people who can least afford to pay it. True conservation requires far more than just sentimentality. It requires funding, fair compensation, and trust.
We project all these lofty ideals onto the elephant, but we don't want to pick up the check for their survival. And that projection, that psychological mirror, is really the final piece of this puzzle. Because despite the conflict, the extraction, the ivory, and the war, human beings have always held a deep, almost contradictory psychological reverence for the elephant.
It is the ultimate contradiction of our species.
Yeah.
We have woven the elephant into the very fabric of our oldest myths, religions, and folklore.
Like Ganesha.
Right. In Hinduism, you have Ganesha, the beloved elephant-headed deity. Geshe represents wisdom, the removal of obstacles, and a grounded intellect. In Buddhist traditions, the elephant is a powerful symbol of mental discipline and immense spiritual strength.
And the white elephants too, right?
Yes, in Southeast Asia, the rare white elephant, an animal with lighter pigmentation, was revered for centuries as a symbol of divine favor and legitimate, peaceful kingship.
So we hold them up as sacred, we build temples to them, but then you contrast Ganesha with the reality of the colonial trophy hunting era in the 19th and 20th centuries. You look at those historical black and white photographs. A wealthy European hunter wearing a pith helmet, standing with his foot resting on the bloody carcass of a dead giant, posing with his rifle.
It's a jarring contrast.
It became this bizarre global ritual of proving dominance over the wild. We project abundance, wisdom, and ancient memory onto the elephant in our temples and our stories, but our global economic systems treat the exact same physical animal as nothing more than inventory. I mean, why do we do this?
It comes down to how human psychology processes awe. The elephant is a force of nature that we cannot fully control. Its sheer scale makes our human ambitions look small and fragile. So to process that discomfort, we turn the animal into a symbol. We sanctify it.
We put it on a pedestal.
But a symbol is just a tool we use to comfort ourselves. Calling an animal sacred or wise or king of the forest means absolutely nothing if the real, physical animal is displaced from its habitat, chained for logging, or sold piece by piece on a black market in Hong Kong.
Right.
We use the myth of the elephant to hide from the brutal reality of what our systems are doing to the actual animal.
We fall in love with the idea of the elephant so we don't have to look at the blood on our hands. Okay, we have covered a staggering amount of ground today.
We really have.
From the Paleolithic hunters organizing their entire society to process a 13-ton giant before the hyenas arrived, to ancient empires capturing herds to serve as living, panicking tanks on the battlefield. We've traced the deadly economics of the global ivory trade that separated the consumer from the carcass, and we've looked at the modern reality of organized crime, DNA forensics, mutating bank vaults in Gorongosa, and the desperate need for coexistence strategies like beehive fences.
The overarching takeaway from all of these sources is that the elephant is not just a wild animal out in the distance. It is a living stress test for human civilization.
A stress test.
Every system we have ever built around them, the hunting protocols, the trade routes, the conservation policies, reflects our shifting values. They force us to ask whether we view immense power as something to respect and partner with, or merely something to dominate and extract.
And so, to you listening, the next time you see footage of an elephant walking across the savannah or standing in a zoo, I want you to look past the trunk and the tusks. You aren't just looking at megafauna. You are looking at nature's ledger. They are a mirror reflecting our own history back at us.
That's beautifully said.
They ask us to consider whether our immense capacity for engineering and intelligence has truly matured into wisdom. We clearly know how to build the systems. The question is whether we finally have the character to maintain them fairly.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought to explore. Throughout this deep dive, we have discussed the elephant's incredible capacity for memory. They are living, intergenerational archives. The matriarch remembers the drought from 40 years ago. She remembers the ancient migration routes perfectly. And as we saw with the genetic shifts in Mozambique, their bodies literally remember the trauma of human violence.
So if the elephant is the ultimate keeper of memory in the natural world, what exactly are they remembering about us right now? If a matriarch could pass down a story about human beings to her calf, a story based purely on how we've interacted with them for the last 10,000 years, what would that story be? And more importantly, is there still time for us to change the ending?